The distress signal traveled through the darkness of space, weak and broken, struggling to reach anyone who would listen. It had been sent out long ago, its message distorted by time and interference, but still, it carried a desperate plea for help. Across countless light years, through the void where no one should have been listening, it finally reached human space. At first, it was nothing more than a flickering anomaly on a deep space monitoring station, dismissed as just another ghost signal from some long-dead civilization. But then, as the message was decoded, its meaning became terrifyingly clear. It was not a relic from the past. It was a call for help, one sent by the last surviving members of an ancient species known as the Zereth, a race believed to have been wiped out centuries ago. Their message spoke of a relentless enemy, a monstrous force that had hunted them across the stars, destroying everything in its path. And now, that enemy had found them once more. They were trapped, their defenses failing, and there was no one left to protect them. No one except humanity. In the heart of the Terran Alliance, the signal was brought before military leaders, scientists, and historians, all of whom stared at the fragmented message with disbelief. The Zereth had been a legend, a once mighty empire that had ruled thousands of years ago before vanishing without a trace. Some believed they had destroyed themselves. Others thought they had flowed into the unknown regions of space. But no one had ever expected that they were still out there, hiding, surviving, waiting for a miracle that might never come. The message contained coordinates, an old star system on the edge of the galaxy, a place where few dared to go. It was deep in uncharted space, surrounded by the wreckage of forgotten battles, a graveyard of ships from a war long lost. The Dravok had made sure of that. The name alone was enough to send a chill through anyone who had studied galactic history. The Dravok were warlords, destroyers of civilizations, predators who left nothing but ashes in their wake. If they had found the Zereth, then there was little hope left. But humans had never been ones to ignore a cry for help. Within hours, a fleet was assembled. Not diplomats, not scientists, warships, battle-hardened soldiers and captains who had seen the worst of the galaxy and survived. They did not hesitate, did not waste time debating the risks. The Zereth were running out of time, and humanity would not let another species fall to extinction. As the fleet prepared to launch, the signal repeated once more, weaker now, as if the senders were losing hope. Please, we are the last. The Dravok are here. There is no escape. Those final words haunted every soldier on board as the ships activated their engines and jumped into the unknown. When the human fleet emerged from hyperspace, they found themselves in the ruins of an empire long forgotten. The remnants of Zereth's once magnificent civilization were nothing more than shattered planets and drifting wreckage, silent witnesses to the destruction that had come before. The star at the system's heart burned dimly, as if even it had grown tired of watching the suffering of those who remained. And there, on a dying world covered in the scars of war, the last stronghold of the Zereth clung to life. What had once been a thriving capital was now a crumbling ruin, its towers reduced to skeletal remains, its defenses flickering weakly against the onslaught of Dravok warships that circled like vultures. The Dravok had arrived first. Their fleet, dark and jagged like the beasts they were named after, moved with terrifying precision. The humans could see the battle unfolding below, Zereth weapons firing desperately, but it was clear they wouldn't last much longer. The enemy had not yet noticed the new arrivals, too focused on finishing what they had started. But that was about to change. With a single order, the human fleet descended. Stealth was not an option. Only overwhelming force would be enough to break the siege. The first human warships opened fire, cutting through the vacuum of space with deadly beams of energy. Dravok ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light, their commanders caught off guard by the sudden arrival of an unknown enemy. Panic spread through their ranks as more human ships arrived, unleashing devastation upon their fleet. The Dravok had spent centuries slaughtering weaker species, believing themselves unstoppable. But now they had made a fatal mistake. They had never faced humans before. The battle was brutal. The Dravok fought back with the savagery they were known for, their ships swarming like a plague, trying to overwhelm the human fleet through sheer numbers. But humans did not break. Every ship was designed for war, every soldier trained to endure the worst. They had faced horrors on their own death world, survived storms that could tear apart cities, creatures that could kill in a single strike. The void of space was no different. They adapted, they countered, and they struck back with a ferocity that sent shockwaves through the enemy ranks. Within minutes, the tide had turned. Dravok vessels, once so confident in their superiority, now found themselves outmaneuvered, outgunned, and outmatched. And then, as their losses mounted, they did something no one had ever seen before. They fled. As the last Dravok ships retreated into hyperspace, the battlefield fell silent. Below, the Zereth stronghold still stood, though barely. The humans wasted no time. Dropships descended upon the ruins, soldiers spreading out to secure the area, to find the survivors who had sent the call. And then, emerging from the shadows of their dying world, the last of the Zereth appeared. They were few, so few that it was clear their species was on the brink of extinction. Their eyes, once filled with wisdom and pride, now held only exhaustion and disbelief. They had prayed for a miracle, but they had never believed it would come. And yet here stood the warriors of Earth, their armor scarred from battle, their weapons still hot from the fight. The Zereth leader stepped forward, his voice weak but filled with something that had been missing for far too long. "Hope, you answered our call," he whispered, as if still unsure this was real. The human commander nodded. "You're not alone anymore." For the first time in centuries, the Zereth were not standing on the edge of extinction. Humanity had arrived, and with them, a promise that the forgotten would be forgotten no longer. The war was not over. The Dravok would return. But this time, the Zereth would not be fighting alone. And this time, the Deathworlders would be waiting. The human fleet remained in orbit above the shattered remains of the Zereth homeworld, their warships casting long shadows over the ruins below. What had once been a grand civilization, a beacon of knowledge and progress, was now a graveyard of broken cities and silent monuments. The few surviving Zereth, their numbers barely enough to fill a small colony ship, stood among the wreckage of their past, their hollow eyes filled with grief. Humanity had saved them from annihilation, but survival was not enough. The Zereth were a race that had once ruled the stars, yet now they were barely more than ghosts, clinging to memories of a time when their people had thrived. As the human officers moved through the ruins, scanning the remains of ancient structures, they found something strange, something that made even their hardened warriors pause. Deep beneath the surface, in chambers untouched for centuries, lay the legacy of a civilization that had been far greater than anyone had ever imagined. Hidden beneath the ruined capital was an underground vault, its doors sealed with technology so advanced that even human engineers hesitated before attempting to break through. The Zereth survivors, weakened and weary, had no idea what lay beyond those doors. Their ancestors had spoken of secrets buried deep within their world, but over the centuries, those stories had become myths, dismissed as nothing more than legends of a past long lost. Yet as the vault doors slowly opened with a low, echoing groan, the truth was revealed. The humans and Zereth stepped inside, their torches illuminating a vast chamber filled with machines that still hummed with energy, untouched by time. At the center of the room stood a towering structure, a database glowing with faint blue light, containing knowledge that had been locked away for thousands of years. The last records of the Zereth Empire, hidden here in their final moments, waiting for someone to find them. The Zereth leader, an elder named Valen, stepped forward, his trembling hands reaching toward the glowing console. His people had forgotten their own history, forced into hiding, always running from the Dravok. But now, here was the truth of their past, preserved in perfect clarity. As the database activated, Holograms flickered to life, revealing the rise and fall of the Zereth Empire. It had been a golden age unlike anything seen in the galaxy. The Zereth had ruled with wisdom, their cities stretching across entire worlds, their fleets unmatched in power. They had mastered technology far beyond anything humanity had seen, energy sources that never ran dry, weapons capable of reshaping battlefields, medical advancements that could heal even the most grievous wounds. And yet, for all their power, they had fallen. The record showed how the Dravok had come from the dark corners of space, their war fleets striking without warning. The Zereth had fought back with everything they had, deploying weapons that could tear apart planets. But the Dravok were relentless. They did not seek conquest. They sought destruction. And slowly, over centuries, the great empire was reduced to ashes. The humans watched in silence as the holograms played, showing the last desperate days of a civilization on the brink. The Zereth, unwilling to accept defeat, had built secret refuges, hiding in the deepest parts of space, hoping to rebuild. But the Dravok had hunted them down, one by one, until nothing remained but the handful of survivors who had sent that final distress call. As the records ended, Valen turned to the human commander, his voice heavy with sorrow. "We were not always this weak," he said. "We were once warriors, explorers, builders. But time has turned us into nothing more than refugees. We have forgotten who we are." The human commander, a battle-hardened veteran named Admiral Kellen, studied the elder for a long moment before speaking. "Then remember," he said, "because the war is not over." With the knowledge contained in the vault, the humans and Zereth uncovered technology that had not been used in centuries. Ancient blueprints for warships, defenses, weapons that had been locked away in fear. The Zereth had once sworn never to use them again, believing that their pursuit of power had led to their downfall. But now, with the Dravok still out there, still watching, still waiting, they had no choice. The surviving engineers, guided by human expertise, began the impossible task of rebuilding. The ruins of the old capital became a battleground of progress, with human machinery working alongside Zereth technology, forging something new, something neither species could have created alone. For the first time in centuries, the Zereth were not running. They were preparing for war. But as they worked, a new discovery sent a chill through everyone present. Deep within the vault, in a separate chamber, was a warning, a message left by the last Zereth rulers, meant for anyone who might one day find their hidden refuge. "We were not the first," the message began. The Zereth had once believed themselves to be the most advanced civilization in the galaxy, but in their final years, they had uncovered ruins far older than their own. Ruins that spoke of another race, one that had been destroyed long before the Zereth had ever reached the stars, and the ones who had destroyed them, the Dravok. The holograms showed ancient symbols, carvings on the walls of long-dead planets, all speaking of the same nightmare. The Dravok were not conquerors. They were exterminators. They had done this before. They had ended civilizations before. And now they had set their eyes on humanity. For the first time since the battle, fear returned to the faces of those who had survived. The war with the Dravok was not just about revenge. It was about survival. If the Zereth had once ruled an empire and still fallen, what chance did humanity have? Admiral Kellen clenched his fists as he stared at the ancient message. The Dravok had made a mistake. They had believed humanity was like the others, another species to be crushed, another name to be erased from history. But they had never faced Deathworlders before. They had never faced a species that had fought its way to the stars, not with fleets of conquest, but with sheer resilience, adaptability, and the refusal to ever back down. Kellen turned to Valen, his voice steady. "Your people lost because they fought alone," he said. "That ends now. We fight together." The elder studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Then we take back what was stolen." And with those words, the last survivors of the lost empire and the warriors of Earth prepared for a war that would decide the fate of the galaxy. The Dravok had written their history in blood, believing themselves to be unstoppable. But they had never seen what happened when Deathworlders answered a call for help. And soon, they would learn the true cost of their arrogance. The war had only just begun. The blackened remains of a once thriving city stretched far beyond the horizon. Towering structures, once symbols of progress, now stood like skeletons against the burning sky. Smoke rose in thick, choking clouds, carrying the scent of destruction. The ground was littered with the ruins of a civilization that had fought to the last breath but lost. It had been a city filled with life, a beacon of hope, but now it was nothing more than ashes. The silence was eerie, unnatural, broken only by the distant crackling of flames that refused to die. In the middle of this devastation, a single ship descended from the sky, its engines humming softly as it touched down on the shattered streets. The doors hissed open, and from within, heavily armed figures emerged, their weapons raised, their eyes scanning the ruins with caution. They had arrived too late. Commander Elias stepped forward, his boots pressing into the dust of a world that had been lost. He had seen destruction before, but this was different. This was not war. This was extermination. The air was thick with the weight of what had happened here. His team spread out, moving carefully through the remains of the city, their helmets filtering out the toxic air. The enemy had left nothing standing. The streets were lined with bodies, civilians, soldiers, children, all reduced to lifeless husks. Whoever had done this had not come to conquer. They had come to erase. Elias knelt beside the remains of a Zerethian warrior, the armor still bearing the scars of a hopeless battle. These people had fought, not for victory, but for survival, and they had failed. His grip on his weapon tightened. Humanity had answered their distress call, but they had been too slow, too late to save them. A crackling sound echoed through the ruins. It was faint, barely noticeable, but it sent a chill through the team. Elias motioned for silence, his ears straining to listen. The static of a broken transmission whispered through his earpiece. It was weak, fading in and out, but it was there. A voice, distorted, struggling, was trying to reach them. He tapped into his communicator, adjusting the signal. "This is Commander Elias of the Terran Fleet. We received your distress call. Is anyone alive?" A moment of silence followed. Then the voice returned, weak, frightened. "Help. Underground. They are still here." The transmission cut off. The word sent a ripple of tension through the soldiers. They were not alone. The enemy was still here. Elias signaled his team to move. If there were survivors, they had to find them before it was too late. The ruins led them toward a massive structure that had partially collapsed. It was once a grand hall, a central point of the city, now reduced to rubble. But below it, deep underground, there were signs of movement. The entrance was sealed with debris, but the faint sound of breathing and movement confirmed what the transmission had said. Survivors were trapped beneath. The soldiers worked quickly, prying away the wreckage, revealing a hidden chamber beneath the ruins. The moment the opening was made, fearful eyes looked up at them. Zerethians, barely clinging to life, their bodies covered in dust and blood. There were not many left, maybe a few dozen, but they were alive, and that meant hope. Before they could begin the rescue, a sharp sound echoed through the ruins, a deep metallic hum. Elias turned, his instincts screaming danger. In the distance, shadows moved. Figures emerged from the smoke, their bodies covered in armor that reflected the firelight in an unnatural glow. The enemy had returned. Tall, silent, and methodical, they moved with terrifying precision. They had not expected anyone to survive. And now, they would finish what they had started. Elias raised his rifle. His team followed. The battle began in an instant. The first shots cut through the air, streaks of light tearing across the ruins. The enemy did not speak, did not hesitate. They moved like machines, efficient and ruthless. Elias fired, his shot striking one of the attackers, but the armor absorbed the impact. These were not ordinary soldiers. These were hunters, sent to eliminate any trace of resistance. The fight was brutal. The ruins provided cover, but the enemy adapted quickly, pressing forward with relentless aggression. Elias knew they could not hold out forever. Their mission had changed. It was no longer about investigating the ruins. It was about getting the survivors out. "Fall back to the ship," he ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. His team moved, covering the Zerithians as they climbed out of the chamber. The enemy advanced, their weapons slicing through the air, forcing the humans into a desperate retreat. One of Elias's men was hit, the energy blast tearing through his armor. He fell with a sharp cry, but there was no time to stop. The ship was their only chance. As they neared the landing zone, Elias saw the enemy shift their formation. They were closing in, attempting to cut off the escape. He gritted his teeth, knowing they had only seconds before they were surrounded. "Get on the ship," he shouted, turning to cover the last of the survivors. He fired rapidly, forcing the enemy back just enough for his team to board. The moment the last survivor was inside, Elias sprinted for the ramp, his heart pounding. A blast seared past him, barely missing his shoulder. He dove inside as the doors slammed shut behind him. "Go," he roared, and the pilot obeyed. The engines flared, lifting the ship off the ground just as the enemy fired a final barrage. The hull shook, alarms blaring. But they were airborne. They had escaped. As the ship climbed higher, Elias looked down at the burning city, at the ruins swallowed in smoke. They had come too late to save the planet, but they had saved something just as important. The Zerithians had not been wiped out. Their legacy still remained. And now, they had a chance to fight back. The enemy had underestimated them. They had thought the war was over. They were wrong. Elias turned to the survivors, his voice steady. "You are not alone," he said. "We fight together now." And in that moment, among the ashes of a fallen world, the spark of resistance was born. The war was not over. It was only beginning. The silence of the ancient ruins was suffocating. Massive stone pillars, covered in strange markings, stretched toward the sky, standing like forgotten guardians of a time long past. The air was thick with dust, undisturbed for centuries, and the only sound was the slow, deliberate footsteps of the explorers making their way through the abandoned corridors. Dr. Elias Carter, a historian from Earth, ran his fingers along the carvings on the walls, his heart pounding with excitement. This place, hidden beneath the barren surface of the dead planet Verethis, was older than any known civilization. No records mentioned it. No maps showed its location. It was as if it had been erased from history. Yet, here it stood, untouched, waiting to reveal its secrets. Behind him, his team worked carefully, scanning the symbols, mapping the layout, and collecting data. The deeper they moved into the ruins, the more uneasy they became. The architecture was unlike anything they had ever seen, too advanced for the estimated age of the ruins. Structures that should have crumbled long ago stood perfectly intact. The stone walls hummed faintly, as if something still lived within them. Dr. Carter tried to suppress his growing suspicion. This place was not just a ruin. It was something else, something preserved, waiting, a forgotten power buried in time. As they reached the central chamber, the feeling of unease turned into something more. The room was vast, with a domed ceiling covered in glowing constellations that shifted as they watched. In the center stood a massive structure, an obelisk, made of a material they could not identify. Its surface was smooth, flawless, reflecting the dim light in an unnatural way. Carter felt drawn to it, his pulse quickening as he stepped closer. Something was buried in his mind, an instinct, a whisper of warning that told him to stop, but he ignored it. He reached out, placing his hand against the cold surface. The moment his fingers touched the obelisk, the ruins trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling, the carvings on the walls igniting with a golden glow. spreading outward like veins of fire. The humming sound grew louder, deep and resonant, vibrating through the stone. The team stepped back, fear flashing in their eyes, but Carter remained still. He could feel something beneath his fingertips, a pulse, slow and ancient, as if something had just awakened. A machine, a mind, or perhaps something else. The glow intensified, symbols rearranging themselves, forming patterns that had not been there before. Then, a voice echoed through the chamber. It was not a language they knew, yet they understood it. "You are not the first," it said, emotionless, yet filled with purpose. The air grew heavy, charged with an energy that made their skin tingle. Carter's breath caught in his throat. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The obelisk pulsed, and for a brief moment, images flooded his mind. Visions of a civilization long gone, of towering spires stretching into the heavens, of ships that defied the laws of nature. And then the fall. Fire raining from the skies, darkness swallowing the stars. The screams of a people who had once ruled the galaxy. The ruins were not just the remains of a lost empire. They were a tomb, a prison, and something inside had just woken up. The walls groaned, shifting as if the entire structure was alive. The team scrambled back as cracks formed across the obelisk, light seeping through them like molten gold. A low, rumbling sound filled the chamber, a deep, guttural growl that sent a primal fear through every human instinct. "We were betrayed," the voice continued. "And now you have opened the gate." The temperature dropped, and Carter could see his breath mist in the air. Shadows moved along the walls, twisting unnaturally, forming shapes that did not belong in this world. Something was emerging, something that had been sealed away for a reason. Panic spread through the team. "We need to leave," one of them said, but Carter knew it was too late. The ruins were no longer silent. A distant, rhythmic thumping echoed through the corridors, growing louder. Footsteps. Not theirs. Whatever had been asleep beneath this place was waking up. The obelisk shattered. A blinding wave of energy surged outward, sending Carter and his team sprawling across the floor. When he opened his eyes, the chamber was no longer empty. A figure stood at the heart of the ruins, tall and imposing, its form barely human. Eyes like burning stars locked onto him, filled with an intelligence far beyond human understanding. "You have freed us," the figure said, its voice reverberating through the chamber. Carter struggled to his feet, his mind racing. This was no mere remnant of the past. This was a survivor of an ancient war, a being that had once commanded power beyond comprehension. And now it had returned. "You do not know what you have done," it continued, stepping forward. The walls of the ruins trembled with its presence, as if the very planet recognized it. Carter swallowed hard, trying to steady his voice. "What are you?" he asked. The figure tilted its head, regarding him with something that could have been amusement or pity. "We were gods," it said. "And now we rise again." The ruins, once forgotten, now pulsed with new life. The past had awakened, and the galaxy would never be the same. The sky burned. Explosions lit up the heavens as warships clashed in the darkness of space, their weapons carving through the void with terrifying precision. The once forgotten ruins of the Zereth homeworld had become a battlefield, and the war that should never have been was now raging across the stars. Humanity had come to save a dying species, but now they stood side by side with the last of the Zereth, fighting a war that had been centuries in the making. The Dravok had returned, their fleets stretching across the system like a black tide, relentless and unstoppable. The air trembled with the force of energy blasts and the screams of dying ships. The humans had known this day would come. They had prepared for it, but nothing could have prepared them for the scale of destruction unfolding before them. Commander Elias stood on the bridge of the Valor's Wrath, his hands gripping the console as he watched the chaos outside. His fleet had engaged the Dravok head-on, and despite their best efforts, they were being pushed back. The Dravok were unlike any enemy humanity had faced before, merciless, efficient, and utterly devoted to destruction. There were no negotiations, no demands, only a single terrifying purpose: to erase anything that stood in their way. The humans and Zereth had uncovered the secrets of the past, had reawakened ancient technology, and had armed themselves with weapons that had been lost to time. But would it be enough? The ship shook violently as enemy fire struck the hull, and alarms blared through the bridge. Shields at 30%. A voice called out, but Elias barely heard it. His mind was racing, searching for a way to turn the tide. They had come so far, fought so hard. And yet, it felt like history was repeating itself. The Zereth had once stood where humanity stood now, believing they could stand against the darkness. And they had failed. Would humanity meet the same fate? The thought was unbearable. He turned to the communications officer. "Tell the ground forces to hold the line. We're not losing this planet." Below, the war raged on the surface. Zereth warriors, once a dying people, now stood alongside human soldiers, fighting for their very existence. The ruins of their ancestors became their stronghold, their last defense against the tide of destruction. They fought with desperation, wielding weapons that had not been fired in centuries, piloting war machines that had been buried beneath the sands of time. And for the first time in generations, they were not fighting alone. Human soldiers fought beside them, their rifles cutting down the monstrous forms of the Dravok ground forces. The air was thick with smoke and fire, the scent of blood and metal filling the atmosphere. It was a battle unlike any other, a battle where the past and present collided, where survival meant defying fate itself. Admiral Kellen, leading the human fleet, watched as the enemy ships moved with terrifying precision, adapting to every tactic, countering every maneuver. They had studied war for centuries, perfected it, turning destruction into an art. But humans were not so easily broken. They were born from a world that had tried to kill them at every turn. They had fought their way to the stars, not with superior technology, but with resilience, with sheer, unbreakable will. And now, in the face of extinction, that will burn brighter than ever, Kellen's voice was steady as he gave the order. "All ships, focus fire on the flagship, cut off the head, and the body will fall." The human warships, battered and outnumbered, shifted formation, pouring everything they had into a single, concentrated strike. The Dravok flagship, a monstrous behemoth of dark metal and pulsating energy, absorbed the hits with its powerful shields, but cracks began to form. For the first time, the enemy hesitated. They had never faced an opponent who refused to break, who fought with such reckless determination. And in that moment, humanity proved why they were feared across the stars. A final barrage struck the flagship's core, and with a brilliant explosion, the massive warship was torn apart. On the ground, the effect was immediate. The Dravok, once an unstoppable force, faltered. The loss of their command vessel sent a ripple of confusion through their ranks. And the Zereth, fueled by the ghosts of their past, seized the moment. Their warriors roared, their blades cutting through the enemy with newfound fury. The ground beneath them trembled as ancient war machines, long buried beneath the ruins, powered up, unleashing devastation upon their foes. The Dravok had come to finish what they had started centuries ago, but instead they had awakened something far worse. The battle raged for hours, but slowly the tide turned. One by one, the Dravok ships fell. Their ground forces were cut down, their advance shattered. And then, as suddenly as they had come, the enemy began to retreat. It was unthinkable. The Dravok did not retreat. They did not surrender. And yet they were leaving, their fleets vanishing into hyperspace, their remaining soldiers falling back into the shadows. The war that should never have been had finally come to an end. As the smoke cleared and the dead were counted, the survivors stood among the ruins, their bodies weary, their hearts heavy with loss. The Zereth, once on the brink of extinction, had fought for their survival and won. But at what cost? Their world was still in ruins. Their people were still few. The scars of this war would never fade. And yet they had something they had not had in centuries. Hope. Hope that they could rebuild, that they could rise again, stronger than before. Elias stood with Valen, the Zereth leader, overlooking the battlefield. The silence between them was heavy. They had won, but they both knew the truth. The Dravok would return. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day the war would come again. "This isn't over," Valen said quietly, his voice filled with both sorrow and determination. Elias nodded. "No, but next time, we'll be ready." The war had never been humanity's to fight, but they had fought it anyway. They had stood where others had fallen, had defied a history written in blood. And now, as they looked to the future, they knew one thing for certain. The galaxy had changed forever. The Zereth were no longer just survivors.